Hi, and welcome back to the Pork Rolls Almanac. I'm your host, Andy, and today we have a special guest, Dr. John Kefuss, joining us all the way from France to discuss lessons learned over a half-decade of beekeeping. We chat about treatment-free beekeeping, bond testing, soft bond testing, and really the role beekeepers play not as managers, but as collaborators in honeybee survival. John's dedicated the past 30 years to treatment-free beekeeping, and we talk extensively about mite management. John has stewarded honeybees across the globe and has some really interesting insights about the future of beekeeping. I think you will all really enjoy this episode. John's extensive background and formative role in beekeeping across the globe cannot be understated. So take a listen, let us know what you think. John, thanks so much for coming on. Please introduce yourself.
Okay, my name is John Kefuss. I'm originally from the United States, born in Ypsilanti, Michigan, lived in Ohio, worked in the West, also down in Texas with bees, and then went to Europe to get my PhD under Dr. Rothenbuehler in Oberusel, Germany. And then after that, moved on to southern France to start rearing queens. And so that's what I've been doing.
Awesome. And you were in South America for a little while, right?
Yeah, I have bee operation Pacific Queens in South America. And normally my partner is going to finish buying me out next year. So that means that I still own part of it. But we specialize in the pollination of avocados. My part on it was rearing of queens and pollen production. We did some genetic selection on bees for pollen production, and because we shipped frozen pollen to Europe for bumblebee production.
Oh, awesome.
Some years we'd ship out about 9 tons of pollen.
Oh, wow. So I'm not super familiar with bumblebees being fed. Are people breeding bumblebees, and what for exactly?
Yes, people do breed bumblebees for pollination in greenhouses.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
And it's good because you can buy them in boxes and put the boxes in your greenhouse, and then you can they'll pollinate for you.
That's awesome. Yeah.
And you don't need that many bumblebees for pollination, but they're very efficient.
Yeah, their colonies are only a couple hundred bees usually.
Something like that, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, awesome. The reason I wanted to have you on is you've got this really diverse history that you've a lot of different places you've worked, a lot of things you've seen, and you've been around beekeeping for decades.
I'd say a little bit more than decades, because
About 50 years?
I started keeping bees when I was 11 years old, and now I'm just a young 79.
Oh, wow.
So that can give you an idea of how long I've been keeping bees. I got into keeping bees because I like to eat honey, and when I was young, I didn't have the money to buy honey, and so I thought, well, if I had some bees, I could have all the honey to eat, which turned out to be true. So,
and you're not sick of it yet?
No. I like to eat honey. And,
so you've seen a lot change in the beekeeping industry.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so the first thing I want to ask is you've been treatment-free with your bees since 1998.
Yeah.
What was it about the 90s that you said, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore?
Yeah, well, it's quite simple. We helped develop some of the first products for treating varroa mites in the early 90s with the veterinary school here in Toulouse and some other commercial beekeepers. And the problem is when you do a treatment, it's a question of dosage. Low dosages, you don't have much impact, but on a higher dosage, you can. And so I realized at the time that we were doing these testing that I really didn't wish to follow the bit about treating the colonies. And then also, in addition, one of the reasons that later on I stopped treating was that I'd start to get headaches when I treat the colonies. At that time, we'd have to fumigate the colonies, and we'd spray the fumes and vapors inside the colony. And usually during the winter time, and about 8 minutes or so per colony. After those treatments, I had the impression that I had a bad headache, but I thought, well, it was just psychological because I knew I was working with a chemical product. And so I figured, well, maybe it's just my imagination. But then I went to a few bee meetings and bee inspector meetings because I was a bee inspector at that time. And the other, one of the inspectors told me, he said, yeah, I just finished treating my colonies, and it's just like somebody hit me in the head with an iron bar. And I said, well, that sounds familiar. And then later on in the meeting, somebody else said, yeah, I treated and had some headaches and things like that. And so then I thought, well, maybe what I thought was a psychological headache was actually a real headache. And so then I decided, well, if I have to change my brain, how much am I going to have to dish out to buy a new brain? Well, yeah, it turns out that at that time there's nobody selling brains except the Russians. This is an old joke, and they used to sell it by the kilo. On a doctor's brain, it cost a couple hundred kopecks. On an engineer's, a few more kopecks, but the most expensive brains were beekeepers' brains. That was because you had to get a lot of beekeepers together to get 1 kilo of brains. And so anyhow, I decided, since I knew I could not buy a new brain, I thought, well, what are the alternatives? One alternative is to, as a queen breeder, I knew that if I stopped treating, I was going to lose some colonies. And I figured that if I had a 10% survival rate, at that time I was running 400 colonies in France, at a 10% survival rate, I could do a breeding program. And after 3 years, I lost about 2/3 of my colonies. And so I had 30% survival. Colonies were not very nice looking and all that. But I was able to start a genetic program. It had actually more colonies than what I needed for the selection program. And so I started off with that and then just stopped treating and continued on. And the process is quite simple. You eliminate those colonies that have high mite populations and you requeen them with queens from colonies that have low mite populations and are good honey producers. One of the mistakes you don't wish to make is to requeen your colonies with colonies that are not good honey producers, because as a beekeeper, from my standpoint, you need to have honey also to survive. And so, if you can always, and so you take your best colonies that show the highest mite resistance and select from them. And that way, even if you don't get mite resistance, you still get good honey producing colonies. And so you limit your damage. And this is something that most beekeepers need to do, because nobody can really afford to lose a lot of colonies. As a commercial queen breeder, I knew that if I lost all my colonies, I could buy new package bees from Italy and get started into queen rearing very quickly. And but not everyone has that same possibility. Also, earlier when I was studying, I did my entomology degree at Ohio State in Columbus, Ohio. And there I had the chance to, during the summer, my summer vacations, work at the lab of Walter C. Rothenbuehler, who was the one that studied hygienic behavior in bees and found the genetic links to it. And so I know that one of my jobs was counting scales of American foulbrood. Very interesting, you know. And so I knew that bees could be selected for a disease resistance. For instance, in the case of American foulbrood, we had one line of bees, the brown line, and the bent square line that you put in 5 cells of American foulbrood, and they'd come down and die out. We had another line of bees called the brown line that you'd put in a whole frame of foulbrood, and they'd clean it out, and the following day they'd be laying there.
Oh, wow.
What's interesting about the brown line is originally developed from a man that melted down combs of beeswax from other beekeepers. And so whenever he'd need a comb for his colonies, he'd go out to his pile of rocks frames and pick out something and just put it in his colonies. And so he was actually doing a preliminary selection for American foulbrood resistance. People sometimes do things that they're selecting, and they don't know they're doing it, but they're doing it.
Yeah.
And the main thing is they get results.
In this process, are you concerned at all about like a genetic bottleneck at all?
No, because we're doing open mating. So our bees are mating also with our neighbors' bees, and so that's bringing us in some genetic variability. And like I say, we're just trying to select out the best bees from what we have. And I had one beekeeper, Mr. Osi. He's dead now, but he wasn't too far from me, and he said that with his Amatrat strips, he could get about 5 or 6 years use out of his strips, because he said every year he just go and scratch them down to clean off the surface and put them back in the colonies. Sometimes they only use a fourth of a strip. I think what's happening was that his queens were playing around with our drones, and the result was that they were getting resistance he was getting resistance probably in from our colonies. But what's important for him was that he was happy with his technique for controlling varroa, and he said he didn't have any problems with varroa, and so that's what counted for him. Whether it was that was being effective or not, because normally they say that Amatrat strips you don't use them for that long, and that they fade out. But anyhow, there's different possibilities that you can have. And
it's awesome.
Yeah. And what's good is that one of the problems when we're selecting, we need mites. We can't select without mites. And so it's good to have neighbors around and have nice mite populations, because that brings us in mites to put mite pressure in on our colonies. I just did if I find it here. We just did some testing of some of my neighbors' colonies, one of the neighbors who treats with mites, and as you can't see it, it's too small, but he was running about 13 to 21% mite infestations on his bees. And at the same time, we were running about 3.7% mite infestation. We're not that little far from him, and so he's probably our main furnisher of varroa mites.
Yeah, you might be the only person I've ever heard talk about needing mites and asking people for mites.
Well, a friend of mine, Steve Tabor, used to live by me here and out the farm there, and when he was in the States, he was testing for American foul brood resistance, and one of his problems was to get enough American foul brood infestation in the colonies to have them come down with foul brood. When you're not trying to do it, you seem to get to the diseases quite easily. But when you're trying to study the diseases, and sometimes you find it's pretty difficult to get your colonies infected, or they get infected with something that you don't wish them to get infected with. And so there's two sides. Those that when you're doing selection, you need the mites, and you need that pressure. You also need the honey production to, like I say, select for colonies that have high honey production and low mite production. And possible to do it. It's just a matter of taking time, and you have to be able to count to 5.
Yeah, so you're referring...
When you have more than 5 mites in a colony, then it's time to change out that queen. Most of the beekeepers I've met have been able to count to 5.
Most.
And if they haven't been able to count to 5, they didn't let me know. And so
you're referring to this process or this concept of bond testing, right? And that's something you came up with, right?
Yes, actually, it was Wolfgang Richter from Freiburg, Germany, and I that worked together and did some of the original testing on bees. He had the Germans had a research project in I think it was in Tunisia and Sejnen, where they were helping farmers, and farmers had cows, goats, and bees. And so when the varroa mites came through, of course, that had a lot of damage on the colonies there, and so a lot of colonies were killed out. But then some colonies survived and were still producing honey. And so Wolfgang's question was, is this genetic or just due to the location effect? And so he sent me some of his queens, and also control queens were sent to me from Germany. We tested them out at one of my bee locations, and turned out that the bees from Tunisia was a genetic effect there. But what was also interesting that was that in some of the Carnica lines, also they showed good genetics against mites. And actually, the final survivor in that experiment was the Carnica bees. So this indicated to me that there was a genetic possibility of selecting. And it was for that reason in about 1998, 97, 98, I decided to stop all treatments because couldn't buy a new brain. And even if I could buy a new brain, I'm not sure I'd have the money to pay for one that I need.
This concept of bond testing, could you exactly describe for folks that have never heard the term, like what it exactly is?
Well, it goes to the slogan of bond, live and let die. In other words, you don't do anything and you just wait. This is the most difficult part of the test. You have to wait. A lot of people are not patient. They're afraid to wait. But usually takes you about 3 years. Why 3 years? Because first you're going to have your mite populations build up. Second year, you're going to start to have impact on those mites on those colonies, and you're going to start having colonies that are die out. And about that time, you'll have the colonies that are surviving will be producing drones, so that in the third year, you have a lot more drone production of drones that probably show resistance to mites. Then it's a matter of just going through, and I think any beekeeper can tell you what is his best colony. They can also probably tell you what is also his worst colony. So if you go through and rear queens from your best colonies, and then you just requeen those colonies with your worst colonies with virgins from those queens, and let them open mate and continue like that. It's what I call a no-brainer, but the problem is you have to be patient, and a lot of beekeepers aren't patient. I remember reading an article recently from Danny Weaver. I worked down at Weaver's apiaries down in Navasota, Texas. That's actually where I learned how to rear queens. And they said they were running about 3,000 colonies at that time, and so they decided not to treat 1,000 of those 3,000, and all the colonies of those 1,000 died except for 9. Now that's
Wow.
having a big economic impact. That's a good bond test. And then he just bred from those, and now they're running 3,000 colonies that they don't treat.
That's amazing.
The problem is to locate your genetic material and incorporate it into your bees.
When you're talking about genetic material, how important is the bee type that you're choosing to that success? Do you think like specific, like are Italians particularly good or bad for this, or is it completely based on place and ideally getting local bees that maybe are
the best thing is to choose a bee that you like to work with. Doesn't make what difference what the race it is. Or we tested our bees and at Inji in ex Yugoslavia there on the island there, and they had different lines of bees there. They had buckfast, carnicas, and that. And some of the lines showed quite good resistance. Turns out our bees were the final survivors of that experiment also. But you can find good genetics in different bee races and things like that. You just have to learn. And I think it's often good to work with a locally adapted bee because it's if you have dry desert conditions, then you should work with a bee that's adjusted to those conditions. If you're working more with a bee in a humid area, such as in Germany or things like that, maybe it's better to work a locally adapted Carnica bee. But in all these different races of bees you can select, the only thing you have to do is sit down and look. And a lot of people say, I don't have the time. But they need to take the time. Yeah.
I'm really interested. You pointed out this study or this bond test basically in Texas where they had, 90-something% die-off versus what you had, which was
it'd be more than 90% because...
Yeah, it's like 95, somewhere.
9 colonies surviving out of 1,000.
So 1% survived, right? Or just less than, versus what you had that about 70% died. Do you think because of the fact that we're kind of kicking the can down the road with all these new chemical introductions because things aren't working anymore, we're going to make that loss bigger and bigger because the varroa mites are just becoming stronger and stronger, or is that
Yeah,
just a
well,
like worst case
we did
scenario?
we did some research work. It's been published and showing you can breed mites for high resistance and low resistance to the chemicals. So it's in the genetics of the mites also. And so when you're treating with chemicals, you're actually breeding mites for resistance to those chemicals. If you're not treating your mites, there's no selection section 4 against the chemicals. And so actually the situation's more complicated than what most people realize, but you have to think of the bee side, you need to think of the mite side, and so like I say, it's more complicated. Now, one of the things that we've done is we came out, maybe you know about the soft bond test. I don't know if you heard about that or not.
Yes.
Essentially, what you do is do a bond test, choose your best colonies, and then so that show the highest honey production and mite resistance. And then you treat everything else. That way you have even less damage than if you would treat everything with chemicals, because you're going to have chemical damage. We'd have chemical damage on your breeder queens. But and that way you can limit your losses, and it takes longer time to do it. But for those that are hooked in on chemicals and psychologically, for them, this is probably the best way for them to go.
And that probably makes more sense for like a backyard beekeeper too, right? Because you're going to have smaller losses.
Makes more sense and maybe more dollars.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah. Now, of course, when I have people visit me, I pay them always 1 cent for every mite they find in my colonies there. And so I have a pile of 50 penny bundles where when people come and they find a mite, then I'll pay them. Always paying cash, hard cash. And you can tell it's hard because you bite it with your teeth, you're going to break your teeth.
Man, it's so cool to see that there's so many different ways that we can tackle this issue. I'd listen to someone talk about this idea of like pulling the drones out of your hive, or the drone cells out of your hive, because the mites would come in from the furthest out comb as a way to basically try to reduce the population, but it doesn't really address that fundamental issue of like building that resistance.
Yeah.
And I think what you're doing actually does. And what I also really appreciate about like the bond testing or soft bond is that the idea isn't like some delusional idea that somehow we're going to get rid of all of the mites. Like the mites are there, they're here to stay. We need to just help our bees learn to co-evolve with them.
Right.
And not doing that, I'm not sure if you're familiar with this book. It came out probably 5 years ago, called The Comfort Crisis. And it was basically about how humans have become too comfortable, and our bodies are not designed to be comfortable all the time. And that's causing health problems. And I feel like we've done that to our livestock, whether it's bees or sheep or cattle or whatever. And we're starting to see a lot of pushback with these natural methods, but people don't, I think, fully grasp that sometimes. So like I'm thinking about my own local beekeeping association, and like I can't talk about being a natural beekeeper because the venom that comes out from people saying like you're causing all these problems, you're the reason that like we have all these mites, when it's like, oh, this is a bigger issue than, you know, having a chemical regimen. So like with that in mind, how's the feedback been from your local beekeeping community, maybe even when you started versus today?
Well, when I started, I actually was short of mites, and so I put advertisements in the bee journals to buy mites. And about 15 years later, I was talking with the Fernandez from the bee health service, and I told him, I said that I put out all 2 years of advertisements in the 2 different bee journals, and nobody had any mites for sale. I thought it would be quite easy. I was wishing to buy mites in groups of 100. Mites are easy to ship. You can send them on a little bit of solution in that, and so they can have some humidity, and they're not difficult to ship and all that. And so I thought, good, I could get all the mites I need, but nobody had any mites for sale. Only 2 people answered me. One said that, sorry, John, but I just treated all my colonies. And the second one said that you can come here and collect all the mites that you wish. But for me, that would be too expensive. But my idea was just to, since everyone had all these mites, they could just shake off a few mites for me and send them to me, and I'd pay them for them. But later on, like I said, about 15 years later, after those advertisements, I was talking with the person in charge of the health. He said, when you put in your advertisements, we got a lot of people asking us what Kefuss was trying to do. Because when somebody's an American in France buying mites, it raises up suspicions, And so,
That's awesome.
I found out about that later on. But like I say, the people that are treating are actually helping to build up your mite populations because they're making the mites more resistance. But I don't worry about people treating because they're furnishing me mites, and so if my colonies kill those mites, whether those mites are chemically resistant or not, that makes no difference to me. The main thing is that my bees can eliminate those mites. How they do it, that's something else.
Thanks for tuning in to the Poor Proles Almanac. We've been exploring new areas of content, including new podcasts such as Tomorrow Today and the Gastropocene with yours truly, but also building a network with folks like Death and Friends. We're also building gardening resources and have a bunch of other content coming in the future. If you'd like to get more information or to sign up for our newsletter where we announce new projects, head over to poorproles.com and click on the Our Email List tab. The email list is only used for important, newsworthy content, and we won't clog your inbox, and you'll get less than 6 emails a year. That's poorproles.com at the Our Email List tab. Yeah, I heard you define your bees as the black hole, and I really like that. It was a good description.
Oh, yeah. The thing is that the mites go in, but they don't come out, but you don't know why. Come on. Well, actually, we're starting to get a little bit of an idea of why they don't come. In one of the cases, mites need a certain chemical called ecdysone, and apparently our bees do not produce that specific type of ecdysone that the mites need, and so they can't survive or don't survive so well. It's just like you have an old car, and if you don't put gas in the car, you're not going to go anyplace. Actually, genetic work is just, I'll go to the old car analogy. I have a Toyota truck from 1980, works quite well, keep in good condition. If the tires are fat, you're not going to advance. If the piston's broken, you're not going to advance so fast. I know because I had 6 pistons in 1 year. I broke one of the 6 pistons, and it was still going around, but it was smoking too much, and I decided to redo the motor. And so anything that can cause a breakdown for the mite, whether it's getting the type of food it needs or the different conditions or anything that or all these things add up and help reduce mite populations. And what might be causing resistance in my colonies may not be the same thing that causes resistance in other colonies. And I think this is good because it gives you a large variety of things to select from. And you're not, mites are always going to be like a hula dancer, where they're going to always try to adapt to your bees, but you need to find things that are different so they can't adapt. And the more things you have, the better. And I say that where people could really make progress, especially in the beekeeping associations, is that every beekeeper, whether it has 1 or 100 or 1,000 colonies, choose out his best colonies. Well, if you have only one, then it's easy to choose your best colony. And you group those together in a colony, or group daughters together from those colonies in an area, and then see which ones have the best resistance. That way, you're spreading your testing out, selection out of a very large area, and it's makes more durable selection. It's not that difficult to do. Would be a good organizational project for beekeeping associations, is to have a Varroa selection bee yard where people bring in their best, what they think is a good genetic material, and they put it to the test and see what happens.
I like that.
If they see that the colonies are going to die out, then they can pull them out from the experiment and requeen them or treat them or do whatever they wish, but at least to test them and have a zone where they when they know they're going to go in there, they're going to be hit with Varroa, and so then they can test it. And could be the beekeeper that only has one colony of bees that has the most mite-resistant colonies. And it's not according to the size of the beekeeper that's important, but it's according to how they've handled their bees and how their bees have been exposed to the mites and things like that.
Yeah.
Like I say, it's a process that takes time, and you have to take time to do things correctly. If you try to go too fast, then you're going to, in the long run, lose time.
Do you have, well, actually, before I get there, I want to ask, do you feel like you're starting to see more treatment-free beekeepers around you because of your example?
Oh, yes. I just had a group come in from the Czech Republic. They heard me talk in the Czech Republic in 2011. And after that, then they start to select, and they've got some of their lines of bees that are starting to show resistance. And so actually they came here in August to learn a little bit more on how I test. And so I profited to test about 90 colonies of bees, and I had them go in and showed them how to do the sampling and do the testing and that. And it's not difficult to do. And now they know how to do it, and they see that there are results. Now they've been asked by others, as I understand, to demonstrate to some of the other beekeepers the techniques they learned at my place, and that way others can select. And the more people you get in selecting, the better. And I think the final point who's going to be the deciding is to show the economics. If you got bees that don't need to be treated, you're going to have a economically more viable economic situation than colonies that need to be treated. Because if you treat only once a year, during that year interval, you're going to have your mite populations build up and negatively affect those colonies. And whether you see it or not, you're going to have lower production.
Yeah.
And so if those colonies don't need to be treated, then you're not going to have that unseen, let's say, mite damage during the build-up phase. And so I think it's just a matter of time. I said at one time, it take about 30 years before people actively start treating for mites. I think that was about, I figure it was about 20 years or so ago. But so things are progressing at the rate that I predicted. And as we see more people having bees that they don't need to treat, then it's going to go through naturally. One thing I know about beekeepers is beekeepers don't like to waste money. They don't have money to waste.
Yeah.
And like I say, I know how that is, and so anything you can do to help the beekeepers save money, then it's good. Now, one person that's starting to have probably a little bit of impact in the States now is Randy Oliver from California. Probably familiar with him. He actually visited us and saw what we were doing. He came to France to give a talk to the French Queen Breeders Association. And so then I drove him down from the meeting, and then drove him to Montpellier, and then down to my place. And then so we had plenty of time to talk. And at the beginning, he wasn't too hot on selecting for mite resistance, but now I think he's starting to convert. And so, of course, these are the type of people you wish to have out there, because Randy does a lot of good writing, backs up his comments with data, which is what I like to do. You can't see it, but when I make a comment, I like to have the data to back it up. If I don't have the data, then I don't make the comment, because my mother said if you assume something, you have to be careful, because she said the word assume can be divided into 3 different words.
Yep.
One of 3 letters, one of 1 letter, and one of 2 letters. Now, this is from my mother. So if you divide that.
Yeah. I got that a lot too.
Right. It's true also.
So what are you seeing right now for survival rates on your hives, like overwintering?
We're running about the same survival rates as other beekeepers, and good years we'll have about the same survival rates. Bad years, it also depends on the colonies and what we've been doing and how much I've been playing with my colonies. If I play around with my 2 colonies too much before going into the winter, their survival rates are going to go down. But we're running about the used to be really our survival rates for before the mites were there was about 5% or so. That was about like in the States. Now their survival rates are going down to 5%. That's not 5% survival, but 5% mortality. That's a little difference. So now mortality rate's going about 20%, sometimes 30 or 40%. But here in France, you have to think about one thing. We have another problem, which is probably getting to be even more important than the varroa mites, and that's the hornets. And I was out today looking at one of my son's hives at the honey house there, and he had a colony of bees there and about 50 or 60 hornets there that are attacking that colony all the time now. Bees are out defending at the entrance, but those hornets will fly in and pick off a bee and fly off. When you have 50 or 60 hornets in front of a colony, that colony's not going to be lasting very long. I put up some boards and things in front of that to block off the hornets, and then made a hornet trap with it's just a simple plastic bucket with a wire screen over the top. You press the wire screen down and put a hole in the middle about the size of a hornet. And then on the inside of that can, you put honey cappings and things like that. And I push in a few hornets to make a little bit of buzz activity there. And some days and other years, I've got about 500 hornets a day.
Oh, wow.
And so when you have that type of pressure on your colonies, that's not good, especially since they're killing off the varroa mites also. They're probably eating those mites I think they eat mainly the thoraxes or things like that. But and so it's varroa mites are a problem, but it's now here in France, it's not the main problem. The main problem now is the hornets.
Are those hornets an invasive species, or are they just opportunists right now?
These are hornets that came in from Asia, and at the time it came in from pottery from China. And at the time when they came in, the French government said they didn't have the money to kill off those hornets, and so those hornets then spread from a region around Bordeaux, then all out over France and different places, and now they're costing probably millions of dollars to beekeepers plus the treatments, when it could have, if it was confined originally, could have been stopped. But the politicians say we don't have the money. We don't have the money, but you're going to have problems later on. Same thing of the giant hornet that came into the States. I hope that the States are doing a job of trying to knock that out, because otherwise it's going to spread.
I haven't heard much about it, so I'm hoping that means that it's been under control, but it could just be under the radar. Yeah,
what I always suggest is that on hornets like that, they should put a bounty on the hornets. Actually, I had a friend of mine from Syria that said in Syria, they put a bounty on hornets when you bring in a hornet queen, and you get so much money, and then the hornet population drops, and so they stopped giving out the premiums, and then after that, the hornet population increased again. If you have hunters, people that can go out and bring in criminals, get paid for it, then why not pay people to bring in hornets, or not even to bring in the hornets, just localize the nest and say there's a nest there, and then it can be treated and taken care of. That's the cheapest way in the long run. show people that there's a financial interest in locating those nests, and that's even a more important financial interest for the beekeepers that those nests are located.
Yeah.
But there's going to probably be other problems come in also. But in beekeeping, the main thing you have to do is to be able to adapt. If you can't adapt, then you're going to run into problems.
Yeah. Now, there's one fundamental issue or situation that's different between where you are in France and here in the United States, and I think that's around the fact that honeybees are not native to North America, or at least not in the last 10,000 years.
I think they were there before that, but
yeah, before the Ice Age, I believe they found some evidence of Apis mellifera out in Nevada, but it's not very closely related to any of the honeybees that exist today. But this raises a really interesting point that we are struggling here in the U.S. is that we have these massive, apiaries that go into like almond fields, and there's a lot of debate about whether or not honeybees are damaging native pollinators. And I'm really interested in your thoughts as somebody who's been around this industry for as long as you have about whether or not beekeeping needs to change to support some of these native pollinators, or if maybe the issue's overblown. I'm really interested to know kind of your thoughts on, whether or not we should be doing something different.
Okay. I had the chance when I worked for the USDA, I worked out in Logan, Utah at the Wild Bee Lab, Bohart. And we were working with osmia and megachile and all that. I was working with honeybees, but everyone else was working with wild bees. And I think what needs to be done is that areas need to be planted also for wild bees so that they can. This is one of the problems for wild bees also is they need certain pollen and nectar resources, and if they don't have those at the correct time of the year, then they run into a problem. I've really never been too much worried about competition between wild bees and honeybees. There might be some competition, but I think if there's enough diverse types of forage, which will then that will make a better impact for the wild bees, and it'll be also better for the farmers.
Yes, so
farmers consider both wild bees and honeybees. I think both are complementary, and I think Nevada now has been officialized as a wild bee city or something like that. There was a project there to get it recognized, and I think that went through there. And so, like I say, there's room for everyone there, and it's a matter that each type of insect has enough resources to eat. And a lot of people say, well, they don't have that, etc. Well, instead of saying that, then I said, do something about it, and to furnish incite people to have gardens or things where wild bees can get their pollen or resources that they need. And you can find wild bees everywhere, and so, like I say, it's just a matter of making certain that everyone has enough to eat.
So the issue is less that it's about the honeybees being there, and more of an issue of the need for us to consider more diversity in our landscapes and more native plants.
Exactly. There has to be more genetic diversity, more plant diversity. One thing people can do is stop mowing their lawns and put in native plants for the wild bees.
Yeah.
I always like to look at the bees flying on the flowers, and so it's a good way to do it, and save on water also, etc. Here in France right now, we have a water shortage, and I'll try some of this year. And so, like I said, you can adapt. You adapt your things, and when you have people preaching on either side for the bees or against the bees, you have to realize that often they're forgetting that it's an in-between area that is actually more important than the extremes. And so.
Now, are you concerned at all about the issue of like disease being transferred from honeybees to native pollinators, or do you think natural beekeeping, treatment-free beekeeping would address a lot of those issues?
I think treatment-free beekeeping will address a lot of issues. In fact, anything that's not resistant to will die out. If it dies out, then it's not going to be a source for disease.
No.
And and like I say, it's a matter of there are probably some diseases. I know there are some that can be transmitted between bees and wild bees, but I think if your honeybees are selected against those diseases, then there can be less of a transmission. And of course, you can maybe say the reverse comes also. Maybe there are diseases that can go from the wild bees to the honeybees. I haven't seen any scientific publications that back that point up, but you have to consider it. You have things coming in sometimes from both directions, and it's like I say, if you just let the bees, you select your bees for honey production, and take the ones that show the best disease resistance, and going to make a large impact all around. It's going to take some time, but in the long run, it's going to be cheap.
Yeah.
Just like we used to talk about, what was that parasite that used to be on bees? I forget it so long, but there used to be a parasite that you find on bees, and now you don't find it anymore. Of course, probably due to the fact that all the chemical treatments have killed them off. But your colonies you just have to let your colonies adapt. And one thing you have to do is have an open mind. You have to realize that you don't always know all the answers. And sometimes you have to just sit back and say, good, let's stop and watch for a while and see what happens, and then go from there.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, the idea of not being in control is really hard to do.
Right.
Because that's how we're trained, whether it's as a beekeeper or any type of livestock. Your job is to help your animals, but also you are in control of the situation. But that's not always what the bees need.
Right. Saw the old cartoon from the Middle Ages where bear was helping its owner by hitting a fly with a rock on his head.
Yeah, that's about accurate.
Same situation there. And the
yeah,
like I say, it's some things I remember one researcher, Jesse Royke, told me that when he runs an experiment, he runs the experiment, and once he has the result, then he designs the next experiment. Now, a lot of researchers design an experiment, and they design the next experiment and the next experiment, even before they have the results of the first experiment. And the problem is that you can get a bias that way. And like I say, I think Borky's technique is good. Get the results, and once you have the results, then go from there. Don't try to program it all in advance as though you know what's the best thing to do, because sometimes you don't know what the best thing to do is.
And that's okay. And I think that's where people struggle.
Yeah.
John, for folks that want to see more, hear more, or read anything, do you have any social media, a website, papers, anything you'd want to point people to?
Well, I don't have any social websites or anything like that. If they wish to read my publications, just type my name on the internet, and then you'll see publications that I've been associated with or done. And there's one that's important for me, an important publication that we published in the Journal of Agricultural Research in about 2015, and it's free of charge to everyone, as I paid out about $2,000 from my own pocket to make sure that everyone could have that free of charge. It was the results of our bond test program over the years, and there they'll see the hard data that we have that backs up why this bond test is functional, and they can see why it's also important to write down information and take data, because sometimes it takes time to collect data, but that's how it is.
Yeah, well, the work you've done will be felt for generations, I think, and that's.
Well, I hope more than generations, but good. That's my own.
Yeah, John, thanks so much. This has been fantastic.
Okay, you're welcome.